It's a warm-up. It's a warm-up, which I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about, but warm-ups are useful. And as an aside, I am listening to the previous thing I recorded. I recognize way more uhs than I was expecting to hear. And then, of course, once you pay attention to something like that, you hear them everywhere. So I guess I do a lot of uhs, but I try and make them sound intelligent, if that's even a thing. But what I was thinking about today was, and I guess I'll tie it back to this idea of warm-up. Which somewhat surprisingly, when you're doing art, and I hate using that term, because from the standpoint that it doesn't really matter whether you're doing art or you're practicing something or you're doing math or exercising or whatever. Just whatever you're trying to do in a concentrated form and get better at. I guess this is something I am referencing here. But the idea that the body, the mind, there is no duality, but let's just, for the sake of communicating, let's talk about those as separate things. But every part of your apparatus for concentration requires a warming up process. Sensation itself is something that doesn't just go on or off. It's on a gradient in which your physical sensations, your neural correlates, all of that needs to be primed. And actually we see this not just with biology and physiology, life. We see it in materials and what we consider inert materials or inorganic materials. It actually happens in abstract structures too, where often you have to, in computer science or machine learning in particular, you have to warm up a model. You have to, and it's even more than the training, and that means many different things to prime or set the occasion, or different ways that I like to talk about it. And I think all these things are very related in the sense that to concentrate and to arrive at awareness, you have to kind of hone the apparatus towards a particular signal, and you have to get deeper into that signal. And what I mean by signal, any thing out there, any sensation, any sound, any light beam, any form, any shadow, anything you touch, any sensation, any object, I mean anything you want to talk about being aware of can be considered a signal. And that signal, there are very few signals, and perhaps the only signals that we can construct or think of are simple mathematical objects, which themselves are not compounded of many sub-signals. There is no typical, at the human level, sensation of sound or vision or whatever is composed of a single, isolated, atomic signal. It's all composed of multiple waves, multiple frequencies, multiple forms, multiple molecules, whatever, however you want to think about it. And so I think the warming up process of your apparatus is involved in the fact that you have to correctly calibrate all the aspects involved with sensation to the signal that's coming at you, and in some sort of quasi hippie quantum mechanic way, the observer exerts a similar warm-up process on the signal. And what I mean by that is that the signal attenuates to the observer also sending signal back to it, which may seem strange. And for certain signals, like let's say gravity waves from colliding black holes, that may be a completely insignificant response. But when it comes to something such as paper and pencil and paper or canvas and paint, it most definitely is that the observer is exerting something on that which is observed. For instance, even in a still life or with a model in the room, the observer effect of the observer observing the subject and then painting it definitely will change will literally have a physical change on that object or that set of objects in the room. And then, of course, as we're sitting here putting marks on the paper, in this example that you can see in the video, you most definitely are changing the materiality of the paper. In a very literal way, as my hand goes over it, it's warming up the paper. Just in the same way that if you do enough making of marks, whether they're good or not, if you do enough of them, you can actually learn about how the pencil heats up in your hand and how the friction on the paper over time changes the way that the marks are made. This is more readily apparent with softer materials like an oil pastel or something. But you definitely feel the effects of observation. And could I go so far as to make a really crazy claim that vision itself, literally stuff coming out of you that is not a touch-based thing, it alters it? Sure. Obviously, with the human subject, you just observing it with your eyes is necessarily going to change a pose that someone may hold. Now, to return to the idea of warming up, I've often found in my own practice of doing things, of concentrating, that warm-up, the more warm-up that you do, obviously the better everything comes out. Now, that's not always true. Sometimes you can just sit down and rip things out and they end up wonderfully and interesting and all that, and there's some sort of serendipitous kind of thing going on, which is totally fine. But in general, as the day progresses, certainly in the morning for me, the work gets more intuitive as the apparatus and the materials get warmed up, and in a way that there are aspects of it that cannot be reached by any other means, meaning you can't shortcut your way to it. What's sort of interesting as a sidebar, now that I'm on this topic and I'm thinking about doing this live, I actually find that I'm able to multitask easier while pacing and doing something or standing and pacing than when I'm sitting here trying to compose something and talk intelligently. I'm actually struggling to pull this off and do what I want to do here. And of course, I've set up a terrible setup, which is sort of a fun thing to think about, which is, how can you operate with different setups, non-optimal setups? And so when you're putting a piece of scrap paper on a really bumpy table with a lot of noise in the background, what does it actually do to the work? Does it show up in the work? Do you really care? But for me, this is just a warm-up and playing around and making marks, and these aren't even good marks. But it's a good warm-up. I can even tell through the process of making this little video and putting these lines down that every little line added to me, seeing the form, but also the nature of my marks. If you look closely and you replay it, the mark making actually changed. I was able to access a wider range of marks in the sense that I could slow down or speed up as my arm muscles and my fingers and materials changed. I can certainly put marks against each other and see them in relation. My eyes have attuned to the situation here as I sat down and concentrated on this scene. The lighting, literally your pupils change. I've looked at this, I've measured as my pupils change. I didn't measure it here, but I've done it in the past where I literally look and see all the changes in my body as I do something, which is just a fascinating thing. And here, obviously, I'm attempting to add a little bit of depth to this weird or just quick warm up. But I don't know if that ultimately is a useful thing, but I do think that so much of what you can be productive at in life is what you are willing to warm up at consistently. And this isn't some inspirational video, but I think it has a material impact on whatever you're doing. And actually, parts of reality are not accessible if you don't actually warm up and gain access to them. And so even just repeatedly, for those that know me, the amount of time I spend doodling circles and shadows and stuff is getting to the point of insanity. But I think if you don't do it, you lose the ability to see it, and that's going to limit the range of possibilities for you to express yourself or accomplish things, or in some cases, literally do anything at all. So I don't know if there's a great lesson in there, but warming up seems essential.